So tell me, did anything goofy happen on your wedding day? I'm hearing a few yeses, besides the fact that you got married. What other goofy things happened on your wedding day? Diana, I see your head shake. Oh, great. Wedding favors were gone due to a flood. Trying to make it acceptable. Okay, Martin, what happened at yours? Oh, no! Forgot to send his parents an invitation. No. They weren't there when the wedding was supposed to start. So they called them and they showed up a half an hour later. Anybody else? Goofy things that happened at your wedding. Mark. Mark also and his wife Ruth were gracious. I did their wedding. And they were gracious enough to move their wedding back a month because I was supposed to be 9 months pregnant at the point when they were going to get married. So they moved it back so that I could be there. Wasn't that sweet? At my own wedding, the altar guild forgot to set up the communion. And so there I am in my wedding dress, behind the altars, finding the chalice, finding the bread, finding the wine, about 15 minutes before the service started. There's probably lots of stories that you guys have about weddings. And, we always anticipate that weddings are going to be perfect. They never are. And something always does. I mean, you and I could tell a lot of stories, including the fact that I forgot the rings one time. The end of the service, the best man hauls them out of his pocket and says, "What am I supposed to do with these?" Or the maid of honor whose heel got stuck in a heating grate at the front of the church and couldn't get out, and there she stood looking at me like, "What do I do now?" I said, "Walk out of your shoe." You had one too. Yeah, it's good. The matron of honor. So, and there's a reason I carry smelling salts in my alb pocket now, all the time. Because I, too, had a groom almost go. So we can all tell funny stories about weddings, can't we? But I've got news for you. You need to all be very grateful that we do weddings the way we do them. Because if you lived in Jesus' time in the Middle East, you didn't have to entertain for like 4 hours. You had to entertain for a week. That's right, wedding receptions went on for a week. And so did you catch at the beginning of this text, it says on the third day? The third day? The third day of the celebration, folks. The third day of the celebration. They run out of wine. Oh dear. Now, that's a problem, isn't it? In Jesus' day, it was the same as now. It was the groom's family's responsibility to provide the wine. And it was a huge social faux pas to run out. So, got a problem. Now, dear old Jesus' mom turns to the stewards and to Jesus and says, or turn to Jesus rather and says, "Hey, son, we're out of wine." And you can almost see him go, "Ma, what difference does that make to me?" And then Mom plays his hand and turns to the stewards and says, "Do whatever he asks." To which he replies, "Mom, it's not time yet." To which this steward, she then reminds the steward, tells the steward again that just do whatever he asks. So what's a guy to do? His mom played his hand. So there he sits, caught between a rock and a hard place. So there, in the room, are 6 stone jars. Oh, by the way, did you notice we have very few details about the wedding? We don't know who the bride or the groom were. All we know is that the wedding happened and it was Cana, and for some reason, Jesus' family is there. Now, is this a relative? We don't know. Was it somebody, just a friend or a family member? I don't know. They live in Nazareth, which is about 5 miles away from Cana. So, is it just an acquaintance or is it just a community event? We have no clue. And why would the wine be of concern to Mary and Jesus? It never tells us. But what it does give us is a whole bunch of details about the wine. So maybe the wedding isn't the focus, despite how I started out with funny stories from your own weddings. I don't think the wedding is the focus. I think the wine and what Jesus did is the focus. So, there he sits, 6 stone jars. Now, the detail there is that they're stone and that there are 6. They're not ceramic. They're not clay. They are there for the rites of the Jewish rites of purification. That required that even the water be pure. And if you had ceramic or if you had clay jars, the water would be impure because of the seepage from the jar itself. So it's important that these things are stone. Okay? 6 of them. Now, do you remember how much each one held? 20 to 30 gallons. Think about that. Think about 20 or 30 gallons of milk in your refrigerator. Would it fill the refrigerator up? At least. Maybe even the second one. Can you imagine that much water? And there's 6 of them. Now do the multiplication. How much water is there? Each one holds 20 to 30 gallons. There's 6. Oh, take 1 0 off of that. 120 to 180 gallons. 120 to 180 gallons of water turned to wine. Now, isn't that an amazing number? Can you imagine ever in your lifetime drinking 180 gallons of wine? But that's what happened. Now, is that more than they needed? You betcha. That's way more than they needed. I mean, after all, this is day 3. Most people are already pretty well looped. Continually looped. And now we have this huge quantity of wine. Now, when the steward takes a sample up to the head steward and to report what had happened, and the head steward takes a sip, and he looks at the bridegroom and he says, "Oh my goodness, you've done this," and this is another one of those little details, "you've done this all backwards. Most people serve the really good wine first while everybody's still sober. And then they bring out the cruddy wine when nobody can tell the difference anymore. Okay? But you've changed that around. You've saved the best until last." Whoa. The best? Now we're talking the $50 bottle of wine as opposed to the box. Okay? There's a huge difference between the two. Or so they tell me. I've never had a $50 bottle of wine. But there is supposedly a huge difference in the way the two taste. We don't have the box of wine here, folks. Actually, a whole lot of boxes of wine. We got a whole lot of bottles of wine at $50 a piece. That's the difference. See? Now, the book of John talks about this not as a miracle, which is how you and I usually refer to this. The miracle of changing water into wine, right? But John never calls it that. The Gospel of John calls this a sign. Just like a road sign. What do signs tell you? When I was driving down Main Street the other day, looking at all the signs, what did I see? What do you see? Direction. Okay. In fact, we've got some of those in the building. You know, we've got the big blue arrows. You've seen the blue. Haven't you seen the big blue arrows? Huh? We hope you've seen the big blue arrows. Yes. For all those people who come into the building and go, oh, where am I now? You know, we have big blue arrows that point direction, that lead you to the office and the sanctuary. What else do signs do for you when you're driving down the road? Okay? So they kind of give you a sense of place, right? Okay, so you're talking about the route signs that... Okay, here's the intersection of Route 28 and 76 or whatever. Okay, all right. What about the businesses, the business signs that you see? Correct. So it gives you a little bit of information. If you're looking for a roast beef sandwich, Ted, you're going to find it at Arby's. And that's right down Main Street at Transit and Main. All right. Or if you want to go to Fridays, it's across the street. Or if you're looking for the bank, there's M&T Bank. There's First Niagara. And you can find it because there's a sign out front, right? And there's even a new little boutique down in Williamsville. As I was looking at signs the other day, I discovered a new sign that I never noticed before. A little boutique. And I know it's new because it's taped over an old sign. Okay, a sign tells you where you are, what direction to go, and gives you some information about what's available to you. But also when you think about like Sunoco, when you see a Sunoco gas station, you see a sign that tells you it's Sunoco, but it also implies that there's a bigger company behind that franchise, right? So it sort of points the direction to something behind it as well. Arby's, you know that there's a big corporation. You know that you can go to any city in the country just about and find a Fridays, and they'll be pretty much the same, even with the same light fixtures and menus. But you know that there's something greater behind it. Now, using all of that information, think about the fact that this story of a wedding at Cana in Galilee and some water turned into wine is a sign that points you in a direction, that gives you information about where you are or who this is. It gives you information about what's available to you. It gives you information about something that stands behind this incident. And what do you see? What does the sign tell you? This is Jesus. Now, I don't know of anyone else who has the ability to turn water into wine. We both missed that class in seminary, didn't we? Yeah, you do need a grape, and yes, you need water as well to feed the grape that's on the vine. Yes. But none of us can turn water into wine. So when people hear of this story, what do they see and hear? They hear about someone named Jesus who is somehow very much different than we are. Right? This is in many ways confirmation that Jesus is in fact who he claims he is, the Son of God. Who else could change water into wine but God? It ain't my duty. I can't do it. You can't do it. And so what happens when we see this sign is that we see in Jesus that he is who he claims. He points to God, who is his Father. But look at what happens to the wine. I mean, we don't have a little bit of wine, do we? It wasn't just, oh, here, let me take the pitcher and change it. It was 6 stone jars, each carrying about 20 or 30 gallons. That's a lot of wine. Why would Jesus change that much water into wine? Unless we were to see behind that our God is a God of abundance. Our God is a God of the best. He's willing to give you more than you need. And not just what you need, but the best of what you need. That's the sign. The sign is that this amazing God who walked with us in the person of Jesus is the one who gives us out of his abundance. To you, not just the wedding guests at Cana in Galilee, but gives you abundantly all that you need. And not just a little bit, a lot, and the best of what you need. Now think about it. Now I was reminded again in my trip to Africa, and I'm sorry, but you're going to keep hearing that because it was in many ways a life-changing event for me, to actually see firsthand what the contrast is between Americans and people of other countries. Folks, are we rich or are we rich? Even those of you who think that you haven't got much, think again. You've got far more than anyone else. We are the richest country in the world. Has God blessed us with those gifts? Yes. Has God blessed me with those gifts? Sure. You guys pay me fairly well. Now, this is not a way of saying you can reduce my salary next year. But the truth is, I have a good income. And you know, it is such a joy to have that income. Did you hear that? Okay, don't miss that part of it too, okay? I also have a huge house. 4 bedrooms, more living spaces than I can ever sit in one night, you know, more televisions than I care to admit. And why do I have this great big house? Why has God given me so abundant? Here's the question I think that we need to be asking during the season of Epiphany. Epiphany, remember, is that time in the church year when we come to understand better who Jesus is. The light goes on and we go, now I get it. This is who God wanted to reveal to us. Okay, so here's who God wanted to reveal to us. He wanted to reveal to us that Jesus is the Son of God. He can change water into wine. He wanted to reveal to us that God gives us abundantly and the best. Now the second question of Epiphany is, what are we going to do with it? What am I going to do with the abundance of my life? What am I going to do with the abundance of my income? I have a great time, folks, giving it away. I have a wonderful time at giving it to the work of the Lord. I can't tell you what a joy that is. And it is not doesn't hurt me in the least. I just love to give it, and I do. What do I do with my big house? Well, number 1, son number 2 moved back in again. Okay, son number 2 moved back in again. Why? I mean, I've got a house. I can open it to him and let him back. We can debate the wisdom of that, but I have the room, and I have company this weekend. One of the bishop's assistants is visiting in Western New York, and she has a standard invitation to stay at the Millville Motel. And I said something to my son to warn him that we were going to have company this weekend, and he looked at me and says, "Why do you always have to open the house so that everybody can stay here?" Because I can? because God has given me this house. It is the same reason I ended up with my daughter Special from Liberia. We had just bought a house out in Elma. We were fairly newly married, and lo and behold, the opportunity presented itself, and I looked at my husband and said, hey, God gave us this great big house. What are we supposed to do with it? Let's fill it up. So we filled it up with a young lady from Liberia, and then 2 more kids. But what a joy it has been to use the abundance God has given me for others. So in this wedding at Cana in Galilee, I want you to learn something about Jesus, because that's what Epiphany is. I want you to see it as a sign that points in a direction, that tells you who's behind all of this, that gives you some information about what's available to you. I want you to see in this event that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. He has powers beyond what you and I could ever dream. But I also want you to see that what God gave us in that wedding at Cana in Galilee wasn't just 6 stone jars of wine equal to 120 to 180 gallons of the best. Those, for us, remind us that God gives us abundantly and out of his joy. And so the second question of Epiphany is, what are you going to do with it? Think about the abundance in your own life. Maybe it isn't your income. Maybe it isn't the size of your house. Maybe it's the joy in your life. Maybe it's the time that you have. But God has given you abundantly, clearly abundantly, and given you the best. Now, how are you going to use it? Amen.